The Spooky Visitor. Jay is a very close friend of mine since my early college days. In the year 2006, he moved to a nearby city to work as a director of photography for a large advertising agency. The following events took place a little over a month after he moved into his new house, when he called me very early one morning to ask me a technical question. To clarify, I've always been my friend's go-to guy for everything that blinks and beeps, so the subject of his call wasn't odd, but the time was. His question was about installing surveillance cameras in his house, so when I asked him what it's about, he mumbled about being fed up and going insane, and then abruptly said, "You know what, never mind, I'll call you later," and hung up. Not having had my coffee yet, it was hard for me to process what he said, so I got up, had my fix, and called him back. He was reluctant to share with me why he wanted to install cameras inside a small house, but I told him I'll help him out anyways. I sent him a few links for some wireless cameras that day, and explained in my email how easy it was to install and configure them. He called me back later and said it was too much of a hassle, and to forget about it. I insisted that he told me what it is that made him consider the idea in the first place. "Did anyone break into your house?" I asked. "No, I don't know," he replied in confusion. I told him that if he had any shred of doubt, then it's only logical that he upped his home security, and even considered installing an alarm system and a couple of motion sensors. I urged him to order the cameras and let me know how it goes. Not hearing back from him a couple days later, I called him to see how things went. He got the cameras I suggested, but he gave up after trying for 2 hours to get them working, and didn't want to bother me with the whole thing anymore. Although he lived a 3-hour drive away, I told him I'll drive up to his place the coming weekend and get it all set up. I arrived at Jay's place early Saturday afternoon. He lived in an old and narrow 2-story house, stuck between 2 buildings. It was vertically divided into 2 equal and symmetrical units, with their doors standing side by side. The house on the right was Jay's, and in the one on the left lived his landlord with his elderly mother. Upon entering Jay's house, you are faced with stairs and a hallway that lead to a bedroom and a rather large bathroom. On the right is a living area connected to a small open kitchen. The upper floor has 2 other bedrooms but no bathroom. All in all, it was a charming and cozy house in a relatively safe neighborhood and apparently a catch. There were 2 girls in their late 20s living there, whom he knew from work, and they were nice enough to let him stay with them for 2 weeks before they moved out when their lease was up. He gave me the tour of the house that was so old, the floorboards creaked whenever his neighbors next door walked around, and the windows whistled at the lightest breeze. And the wall that separates the 2 houses was so thin, he could hear the middle-aged landlord quarreling with his mother as if they were sitting with him inside the room. He showed me his bedroom on the upper level, and was complaining that he had to go downstairs every time he needed to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. I asked him why not move to the bedroom downstairs that not only had the bathroom right next to it, was also much bigger, and had been vacant for like 3 weeks now. That's when he paused, then started telling me the series of odd occurrences that defied explanation. The first thing he noticed these events was when he found that some of his things had been moved around the house. At first he thought it was one of his roommates, but when they left, he blamed himself for being absent-minded. But when one day he looked everywhere in his room for his shoes, and later found them downstairs by the entrance door, he started to pay close attention. He would get home after work and find an open drawer in the kitchen, the TV unplugged, or wake up in the morning and find one of the couch cushions on the kitchen stool, or one of his coffee table books by the windowsill. Nothing went missing, though, and although he changed the locks the day the girls moved out, he went and changed them again. But that didn't stop the events. The whole thing didn't disturb him much until the soap incident. His previous roommates have left behind a bar of soap, the smell of which he could not stand. So he chucked it in the medicine cabinet and got a new liquid soap dispenser that didn't smell so girly and herbal. The next day, and to his astonishment, he found the bar of soap back in the soap holder, and the liquid soap by the bathtub. He was baffled. He thought he was losing his mind at the moment. What made him freak out, though, is the night before he called me very early, when he went downstairs to the bathroom around 2 a.m. Although he's a man's man, he admitted that at night he likes to take a leak while sitting down. He also keeps the bathroom lights off so as not to disrupt his sleepiness and go back to sleep quicker. I chuckled, but he went on to say that as he was reaching for the toilet seat in the dark, he noticed that it was already down. He didn't think much of it, but as soon as he sat down, he jolted back up on his feet. The toilet seat was warm. He quickly turned on the light and took a frantic look around. There was no one around. He then noticed that the toilet wasn't flushed. He stood there terrified. Was it him? If it was him, then why doesn't he remember? And how come the seat was still warm on such a cold night? He didn't sleep at all that night. He sat in bed wondering if he was losing it. He was contemplating breaking the lease and moving out. But he really liked the place, which was very affordable. And given his very tight work schedule, it was perfect for him. It was too much of a hassle anyways to start looking for another decent house in a city that he did not know very well. Besides, he thought there must be a rational explanation for all of this, and he could probably figure out what's happening if he had surveillance cameras. He waited until it was decent enough in the morning and called me. I was attentively listening to him, recounting all those spooky events, and I was now even more determined to install those cameras and get to the bottom of it. But he kept refusing. "It's one of three things," he said. "It's either me, some paranormal stuff, or an intruder. In either case, I'd rather not find out. Just the thought of catching something on the camera terrorizes me to the core." Not wanting to be pushy, I suggested that we install them outside the house instead. We set up one camera over his front door facing the street, and another outside his bedroom window facing the backyard. This way, if anyone happened to be getting into the house from either side, we had a very clear view of their point of entry. We also did a full round of the house, and made sure all the windows and doors were locked and secure. I left Jay's house feeling frustrated for not having resolved this chilling enigma. I was anxious for a whole week, talking to him every day to make sure he was okay, and that things were not escalating. Stuff were still moving around, cabinets still opening, lights turned on, but he somehow managed to ignore it. He emailed me each day's camera recordings, as he was still unwilling to watch them. I painstakingly examined each one, hoping to catch something, but all I saw was Jay going about his daily routine. After a couple weeks later, I got a call from him early in the morning as I was getting ready to work. "Is everything okay?" I asked anxiously. "Yeah, I'm fine, but you can't believe what just happened," he said in a rather collected tone. "Tell me now, what is it?" I asked. "I'll have to see to tell you, so come by tomorrow," he calmly replied. Although I had plans the next day, I postponed them. Jay greeted me with a rather big smile as I arrived to his place the next day. "Did you find out what it was?" "What is it?" I pestered him. Sit down," he said. "You need to be sitting down to hear this." I sat on the edge of the couch, all eyes and ears, as he recounted the chilling events. At the break of dawn the previous day, he woke up to the sound of footsteps and wooden floors squeaking. It wasn't unusual, but it was suddenly followed by a loud yell. "I know you got her flowers on Valentine's!" It was the voice of the old lady next door. But the first thing that crossed Jay's mind was that we're still in October. Why is she badgering her son about Valentine's? And at this god-awful hour? "Go ahead. Pretend you're sleeping, you useless piece of shit," she continued shouting. "I'm tired of your shit. I can't take it anymore." But the odd thing was, she wasn't getting any response. Only silence from the other side of the heated conversation. Jay covered his head as he tried to muffle the sound of his neighbors quarreling at this very unusual hour. Then the footsteps grew louder when suddenly he got startled by an ear-piercing voice screaming, "Get up!" He was now fully awake and fed up. He pushed the covers aside to get up, when he suddenly saw her old figure with an enraged face standing over his bed. He was terrified and dumbfounded. She was in his room talking to him. Before he could get his thoughts together, he heard her son's voice from downstairs shouting, "Ma, come back down!" He sat frozen in bed while he watched the creepy old lady, barefoot in her sleeping gown, slowly turn around and walk out of his room. He was relieved for a second, until he realized that these strangers are in his house. He quickly got up and ran after them. As he rushed down the stairs, he glanced at the front door, but to his astonishment, it was still locked. He then heard a racket coming from the closet under the stairs. He quickly opened the closet door, turned on the light, and took a step back. Nobody was there. One of his camera's tripods was on the floor, but everything else was as he left it. While looking around the tiny closet, he noticed a sliver of light through a hair-thin crack between two boards of the paneled wall in front of him. He hesitantly stepped inside to take a closer look, and saw some movement through the crack while hearing his intruder's dampened voices from behind the wall, now in their house. Convinced one of the panels was a trap door, he pushed and pressed, but it wasn't budging. He ran outside, angrily pounding on his neighbor's door. The guy unlocked his door, cracked it open, and looked at him in silence. What were you doing in my house? How the fuck you get in here?" Jay furiously asked. The man frowned at him and put on a confused look. "I saw you in my house. Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about," Jay yelled. But the man kept on his act, pretending to be oblivious to what was happening. "Listen, you either tell me right now what you were doing in my house and how you got in there, or else I'm calling the cops. I have you both on camera," James exclaimed while pointing at the camera over his front door. The man peeked out and was surprised when he saw the camera. He then stepped out and stammered, "Let's not make a big deal out of this. My mother is a very old woman and has Alzheimer's, and..." But when Jay firmly demanded to know what was going on, the creepy landlord confessed. It turned out that the house where Jay was staying used to be the guy's childhood home. His father used to cheat on his mother all the time, and one of his mistresses was their neighbor, to whom they rented the house next door to. His father used to sneak into her place at night from the closet under the stairs, through the secret door. The creep doesn't know if the door was already there, or his father built it. But he found out about it one night when he caught his old man sneaking through and followed him. When his father eventually left them, they switched houses because the other house was much better maintained and had a bathroom on the upper level. Then a few years ago, his mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and kept wandering in the next door tenant's house through the backyard door, convinced it was her own home. The creep claims that his mother discovered the trapdoor recently, and that he caught her only once before wandering into Jay's house at night. Jay and I debated the whole story, but we weren't convinced that the old lady could have discovered such a well-hidden door by herself. We believe the guy had been sneaking into the house to peep on the girls who were living there before, and God knows who before them. And his mother must have discovered it while he was on one of his nightly sneaks. So, Crazy Jay told his landlord that he's willing to let it pass and not call the cops on two conditions: remove the trapdoor or board it shut for good, and to cut the rent in half. The guy happily obliged, and Jay never had any more incidences for the entire time he lived there. He moved back home 2 years later, but before he left, he warned the new family that was moving in about the boarded trapdoor and advised them to keep an eye on it and always make sure they lock the closet door. Boy in my living room. When grade 6 ended, I moved from private to public school. It was about October at the time, and I had made several friends from my neighborhood. We hung out after school most days, riding bikes, going to the local park, etc. I got home from school on the bus at 3 o'clock, but my mom didn't get home till 3:30 to 4. I wasn't allowed to have anyone over or go out till she got home. On this particular day, My mom had told me that she was going to be late. At the time, I didn't have a cell phone, so I got home and called one of my closest friends, Andrew, to let everyone know I wouldn't be hanging out that day. My group consisted of myself, Beth, Leslie, Isaac, Brady, Andrew, and Josh. After informing my friends I wouldn't be able to see them that day, I made my way upstairs to take a shower. I had been in the shower for about 15 minutes when I heard a huge bang from downstairs. I remember thinking that maybe it was my mom, as I was halfway down the stairs, wrapped in only a towel. I remember she wouldn't be home till at least 5 o'clock that night. I panicked and ran back upstairs to find something heavy to defend myself with if worse came to worse. The only object I could find was a math textbook that had been laying on my floor. Deciding it was better than nothing, I raced downstairs into my living room. Lo and behold, standing in the middle of my living room was Brady. Extremely angry, I asked him what the fuck he was doing in my house, especially when he knew that no one would be home. He chuckled and shrugged like it was some kind of joke, responding with, "I just thought you should know that your back door was unlocked." Swearing like a sailor, I told him to get out of my house. As soon as he left, I locked the door and made sure the front door as well as all our windows were secure. Later I found out from Andrew that Brady had broken into my house, entering from a window on 3 other occasions. Nothing had been stolen, and Andrew had no idea what Brandy had done while he was inside my house. After this happened, I told my parents, who were just as upset as I had been. My friends and I cut off all contact with Brady after that. My parents never pressed any charges or anything like that, but my dad said if he ever saw Brady on our property again, he would do something. Thankfully, I haven't heard anything from him since that happened 5 years ago. Brady, let's never meet again. Coffee? First of all, let me just say I love the subreddit. I've been a lurker for some time, and I finally worked up the courage to make my first post. This actually happened during my first few months at university in Montreal. For those of you who haven't been, the city has an unfortunately large homeless population that can be found almost everywhere. Most of the time they keep to themselves, but other times they can be forward. Anyways, it was the middle of the day, and I decided to get a coffee to energize myself for the long study fest I had planned for myself that day. I get my coffee, no problem, leave, and make my way towards campus. Cutting through a side road, with my iPod blasting, I don't notice a large homeless man fall in step behind me, keeping his distance, but still uncomfortably close. Abruptly, he grabs my shoulder. Frightened, I turn around. He has this bedraggled, deranged look that almost most of them do have, like a dirty beard, long greasy hair, and a winter coat in the middle of October. He gives me a grin that in no way makes me at ease, gestures at my cup, and intones, "Coffee?" I try to turn back around, but he grabs my arm, still smiling that horrible rictus, and repeats the question. I nod, and he loses the smile and lets me go. As I nope all the way back to campus, my lab partner, who I've never really spoken to outside of the lab, joins me and starts making conversation. I'm a little surprised and shaken by what just happened, but we keep talking all the way to the library. When we arrive, he pulls me aside and says, "Hey, you realize there was a homeless guy following you before we started talking, right?" It's all in the past. Or is it? When I was 25 years old, over 10 years ago, I met a guy who grew up with some friends of mine. He seemed really cool and we started dating. After about a month, I noticed the guy, Kurt, was very jealous and controlling. If I mentioned I was with a group of friends, if any of the guys were single, He accused me of sleeping with them and would ignore me for a couple of days. In retrospect, I should have gone out of Dodge, but I was admittedly an insecure girl who was afraid to be alone back then. Another few weeks passed, and I'm a week away from getting my new apartment, which was in the same complex as his. I figure I can tough it out and break up with him when I get the place. Staying at his house was a quick walk to work. Staying at my friend's was a half-hour bike ride on a rough gravel shoulder on the side of a dark highway. Turned out he broke up with me. No big deal. This is where it gets ugly. He would constantly message me on MSN with passive-aggressive insults. He was the king of jabs that to an outsider wouldn't seem so bad. I tried blocking him and changing my email, but he would realize he was blocked and start contacting friends. He even contacted a really obscure friend I never talked about, leading me to believe he hacked my email. He would show up at my patio doors and walk right in if it wasn't locked. He'd come in and just grab things and said he was borrowing it. He'd bring it back and things stayed peaceful, I guess. One day he came in, and I was in my room folding laundry. He proceeded to flirt and joke. It was actually funny, so I laughed. He took that as an invite and, sparing the details, didn't stop until I was in tears. That was the day I started double-checking the patio doors and sacrificed a nice breeze on warm days. At the time, because I knew him and was laughing with him, I thought I was to blame, so never told anyone. A couple weeks later, I was at his brother's place in his building, small town. He called me asking where I was. I asked if he was at my door. I looked outside and sure enough, he was there. I told him I was at his brother's. Kurt started accusing me of sleeping with his brother. I went downstairs to calm him, feeling safe since his brother was in the building and knew where I was. He yelled at me and kicked me in the stomach. I went back and told his brother, who was going to confront him, but I told him no. With that, I went to the police and made a report. I also had the police come facilitate getting possessions back he refused to return. That was a separate call. Things quieted down. I eventually got a new boyfriend in the States. My boyfriend contacted me and said that Kurt tried to add him on MySpace. I looked at the existing page, and he had changed it, so it was all the pictures of me with slanderous comments. He did that so my boyfriend would see it. Luckily, my boyfriend knew all about him already. If you're wondering why I didn't go to the police again, here's why. I would text him off and telling him off and threaten to go to the police. He would then threaten to charge me with harassment due to the texts. My career relies on a clear criminal check. I was afraid to risk it. Also, when I reported the assault, the small-town officer claimed he could use force to remove me from his apartment, even after I said I never entered but was in the hallway. I didn't trust the police now. He would watch my apartment and ask whose car was in my spot, telling me he felt betrayed. He would message me telling he made dinner and to come over. To be honest, I was afraid not to. I'd go eat and leave. It seemed to make him feel he was in control, and I felt it was better than any potential lashing out if I didn't go. I eventually moved to another town, but the passive-aggressive abuse continued. Kurt had moved to another province where my niece lived, and started using my niece to get to me. They conspired to tell me he sexually assaulted her. I stopped speaking to her as well after that. Who does that? I eventually moved across the country, and even then, a year later, he contacted someone I met up with out there that was also from our hometown. Only when this guy told him he knows all about him, and if he messes with me, he's messing with him, did it finally stop. Then 10 years later, last October, I moved back home. I didn't change my location on my Facebook, because even years later, I didn't want him easily finding out where I was. I also posted that if anyone asked about me not to share my information. I got a notification on a dating website that Kurt wanted to meet me. I know this was his way of letting me know he's back too, and still around. I hadn't thought of him seeing me on there. I was afraid to go out at night, and when I did, I always looked over my shoulder. A week passed with no further contact. A few weeks later, I saw him at a festival. We made eye contact, and I hated that he may have seen my initial reaction of shock, so I composed myself and said hello. He simply smirked. I felt like I looked into the eyes of the devil. I left, watching him to make sure he didn't follow me, and make sure he didn't see what car I got into. I knew that he had seriously abused women since, but had gotten off every time. because he hires the best lawyers. My only comfort is that I don't think he revisits the past too much, because those women know what he is. His charm won't fool us a second time. I've been contacted about one of the most recent women who was wanting to contribute to the case after speaking to her, so I called the police asking for a copy of my report. That cop who said he was allowed to kick me never even filed it. So if anyone has other ideas as to how I can prove this to the mods, I'm all ears. Also, my moves were never about him, just making the point that distance didn't stop him. I hope to never see him again, but I hope the law does. His last girlfriend has a permanent brain injury, and the next one will probably not be so lucky. He gets more confident every time he gets away with it. I'm actually nervous about posting this, in case it gets back to him from someone recognizing the story. But I am smarter now, and take more safety precautions. Don't walk alone in the dark. I live in a farming area, and there's a lot of fields, and woodland as well. So it's not a hard place to find somewhere to walk my dogs of their leads. About 2 years ago, one evening, I completely forgot to walk them. It was about 8:30, and it was in the October half term, so it was already dark. But I wasn't too bothered, because I know the whole area really well. So I took my large female boxer dog, who was only a puppy at the time, but had insane muscle, and was already full grown in height, and my Chihuahua ex Jack Russell out. I'm a 5'5" girl, with quite a bit of muscle on me, as I did a lot of physical sports, including martial arts, so I could easily protect myself in a fight. Because of this, I thought I'd in a torch and I was safe. I began walking out of my estate and up a hill, with my earphones playing some heavy metal music, to get me in the zone for a quick walk on the back fields and then back home. When I reached the top of the hill, which led to another housing estate bordering the fields, I noticed that there was no traffic at all, no movement. At this point, it was almost 9, and there was nobody to be seen, which I thought was unusual because it's a well-populated area. Besides this, I carried on walking, with little crossbreed biting at the lead with excitement, and my boxer trying to attack my shadow. Once we reached the fields, it was almost pitch black there, with no lampposts. The only light was from the house that faced the field. I took my boxer off her lead, and as boxers do, she bounded off into the tall grass like a child, whereas my little mutt followed my heels, nipping at my jeans to remind me he was still there. After 5 or so minutes, my eyes had adjusted to the lighting on the field, and I could see my boxer had stopped a meter ahead of me, staring at something. Instantly, my Jack Russell X starts growling and stands in between my legs. I look up to see a figure standing around 3 meters away from me. I shout my boxer to come back to me. Reluctantly, she turns to me and begins running to me, my eyes never leaving the figure. I call out and apologize for my dogs. I think I said something like, "Sorry, she's only a pup. She thinks everybody wants to play." Nothing. Just silence from the figure. I could see that they had long black hair and what looked like a long raincoat on. The shoulders were wide, however. I still think it was a woman. Once again, I called out to her, Are you okay? Did she jump on you?" Again, nothing. At this point, I could feel her eyes on me and my dogs. My littlest dog began barking and squealing, and my boxer began barking this horrifying bark I've never heard her produce. It sounded like she was trying to threaten the figure. Then I heard the woman begin laughing, menacingly. That's when I lost it. I picked up my little dog and ran, knowing full well my boxer would follow behind me. Like I said earlier, I do a lot of sports, so I'm fast and I don't have bad stamina. Jumping over the gate with my dog in my arms and my boxer right behind me, I glance over my shoulder and see the woman clear as day in full pursuit. I couldn't give you the exact details, as all I could tell is she looked like something that's straight out of a horror movie. She was very grotesque in every sense of the word. At this point, My boxer was running just a little ahead of me. She knew I was running home, and that this woman was bad news. She could have bolted, but for whatever reason, she kept a speed that matched mine. Maybe it's the dog's loyal instinct of the pack or something, I don't know. Anyways, by the time I reached the end of the first estate, I slowed to look behind me. Big mistake, she was still running quite a distance behind me, but she was coming. At this point, my head was complete mush. But I knew if I went down the route I came to, she would catch up to me. So I darted to the left at the end of the estate and ran across the road down the street, my boxer right by my side, and at this point, my mutt had gone silent and was digging his paws into my arms and chest. I ran like I never ran before. At the end of the street, I turned right, which brought me onto a street next to the opening of my estates. I didn't look behind me until I reached my driveway. I put my mutt down, and he ran with my boxer to the front door of my house. I looked behind me. She wasn't there, but I could hear her laughing. So I ran to the door, opened it, and slammed it behind me. Then I bolted it. I turned the porch lights on and peered out the little window of the door. She walked straight past the end of my driveway. She hadn't seen me. I told my older sister what happened. She told me it was best we didn't tell her dad, as he probably wouldn't let me walk them alone again. And ever since that night, I rarely forget to walk my dogs before it gets dark out. And when I do, I walk them first thing in the morning afterwards. So, scary lady in the farmer's field, let's not meet again. The Kidnappers and the 1990 Camry. So I saw an article on here earlier, which gave me flashbacks of my encounter and wanted to share. To give you an idea on where I'm from, I grew up in a nice middle-class neighborhood in Maryland, about 15 minutes from the border to DC. We never had any serious crimes in our neighborhood, just the typical petty theft from people leaving their cars unlocked. It was a cloudy, chilly Saturday in October of 1993. I was 8 years old. My brother James was 12 years old. We had just left his friend's house after playing street hockey on his driveway for hours, and we had to get back home around 5:30 p.m. His house is a couple blocks away from the elementary school, and basically across the street from the school is a pretty big-sized park. Its entrance has a fence with a path that separates the fence. Along the street, the fence continues into a backyard to a house which sits on a cul-de-sac. My brother and I, on the left side, approached the four-way stop sign and noticed a white 1990 Toyota Camry sitting there. We didn't think much of it and walked down the sidewalk towards the school. I was talking to him about Art Monk, the Redskins, and how we could use the Beckett to write to the stadium and hope to get an autograph. We got the autograph. I realized James was oddly quiet during my idea about writing to the Redskins. I asked him if he was listening, and he said, "Keep talking. Act cool, act normal, don't look back, okay?" Confused and nervous, I responded, "Okay, what's going on?" During my talk, my brother was paying attention to the Camry that was driving very slowly behind us. We played it cool, walked our normal pace, just about to pass the school. I continued to talk while we were approaching a big field that sits directly across the entrance of the park. My brother put his hand on my chest, which made me stop immediately. He turned back and glanced at the driver. Now, I wasn't sure if it was to see how the car would act, if he wanted to make a move across the street into the park, or if he was trying to get a see of the license plate. However, when we stopped, the car stopped. This time I got a good look. The driver was female, brunette hair to the shoulders. She looked almost drugged. She never blinked. She looked straight ahead, not at us, not to the side, straight ahead. The passenger was the intimidating one. He was red-headed, long hair, and had this angry look. His eyes watched us intently. To be honest, he looked like the comedian Carrot Top, an evil-looking Carrot Top. After getting a good look and realizing the situation that we were in, I started to get nervous. I was breathing heavily. My legs felt numb. I looked at my brother and he just said, "Keep walking." What was weird about this day, there weren't any cars on the road. It felt like a ghost town all of a sudden. It was just us and them. We continued walking towards the next block when the car all of a sudden started merging into the other lane. He was going to block us off, and then who knows what. My brother, being older than me, was faster than me. He knew it, I knew it. Staring straight ahead and looking at our options, my brother said, "On the count of 3, run, okay? Run as fast as you can and follow me." Before I could even accept the deal, he started his countdown. 1, 2, 3. He's off and running. I'm trying to keep up. The car slams on the accelerator. James is able to run across the street. When I try to do the same, the car almost cuts me off, and I could feel the bumper against my pants. The Camry now has to back up and accelerate again after us. My brother made the move across to the right side of the street, and I followed as fast as I can. I realized that he was making a run for a friend's house. He gets there and is ringing on the doorbell, banging like crazy. The Camry catches up. The passenger gets out of the car. As soon as he gets out, my friend's dad opens the door. James rushes in. The redhead gets back into his car, and I dive through the open door. My friend's dad runs out towards the car, speeding off, yells something as he tries to get his license plate. I'm crying. My brother is crying. My friend's dad is shaken up, even though we live a block away. We had our dad come pick us up. We called the police, wrote a report. They said they keep their eyes open. On Monday, we notified the elementary school about our whole ordeal. However, they didn't do much to let the public know. It wasn't until the next week that they sent out a flyer to the rest of the parents, and cops began patrolling the neighborhood. See, during the week, 3 other cases happened with that white Camry, following kids. One was even more terrifying than my experience, where the kids were jumping through backyards because the redhead was chasing them through the park. After that week of disturbances, everything stopped. I never heard of an arrest. I don't know if they moved on to another city or state to try to abduct kids. All I know is that they terrified our neighborhood that year, and it took a little while for things to seem normal. The brunette. I always wondered what her role was. Or would she participate in a terrorizing, menacing act? Either way, her face and that ugly, nasty redhead man are etched into my brain. Let's not meet, because if we do, I may have to kill you. Hopefully you're in jail, rotting away, or already dead, because you're a scumbag. Heavy breather on the phone. This happened in October 2015. I was 26 years old, female. My boyfriend and I were driving back to Virginia from our trip in Acadia, Maine. I don't have a valid license, so my boyfriend had to drive the entire trip. At some point in Connecticut, my boyfriend became very tired as it was getting very late. We had spent so much money during our trip that we decided to find a cheap place to stay for a few hours before getting back to our trip home. We found a place in Bridgeport called Sunnyside Inn or Motel, something of that nature. It seemed a little sketchy, but we were desperate, and it was only $88 a night, cheap and easy. We should have been warned by the fact that the clerk was behind bulletproof glass, but again, we were desperate. Wanting to eat something, we walked across the street to the Good Bazaar. As we were walking back, we noticed a new car in the small parking lot, 2 spots over from ours. My boyfriend, being the protective man he is, has me walk close to him as we approach this car to get his knife for protection. For those of you who don't know, Bridgeport was once one of the highest murder capitals of the U.S. We start walking up the stairs to the 2nd floor towards our door. A large man got out of the new car and began following us, but with a distance. My boyfriend had me walk ahead of him and race to the room. We got and locked the door and placed a small table against it. The room was a wreck. The mattress folded in half. When we sat on it, tiles on the bathrooms were falling off the walls. The chain on the door was removed, and there was a large odor of cigarette smoke wafting through the vents. My boyfriend decided to look up this place online. He found all negative reviews, some with photos of doors with bullet holes, dirty underwear on the beds, and one review saying they found blood in their room. Since we were already there and very exhausted, we decided to try and get some rest, then leave early. A while went by. We ate, watched Netflix, and tried to sleep. I fell asleep for a while, but my boyfriend never fell asleep. Around 6 a.m., the phone rang. My boyfriend picked up, and all he heard was a heavy breathing on the other end. He asked who it was, but they never replied. Then they hung up. He woke me up, and we booked it out of there. Never even checked out at the front desk, so heavy breather, let's not meet. The Girl and Her Grandma. It was a chilly Wednesday evening in October when I was 14. I was standing in our kitchen waiting for my father to drive me to church school. My father, meanwhile, was stomping back and forth from the living room through the kitchen to the basement stairs. He would go to the top of the stairs and yell down at my 17-year-old sister, who was also getting ready to leave. She had a meeting of her church group to go to as well, but since her meeting wasn't at the church, she was driving herself. Since she was taking her time, my father would yell down the stairs for her to hurry up, and then stomp back towards the living room and look for his keys, which he had misplaced. So there was my father, standing at the top of the stairs and yelling to my sister in the basement. Behind him was our back door. The back door was open, but the screen door was closed. My father then moved away from the screen door, and there she was, a girl, standing in our driveway and peering in through the screen door. Peering is not the right word. She was staring. She was tall and slender, with straight black hair tied into a ponytail. She looked a few years older than my sister. It was her eyes, however, that were the most noticeable. They were huge and unblinking. Her eyes would dart around the inside of our kitchen, scanning the room, and then she noticed me. I was still standing in my spot, leaning against the kitchen counter. I wasn't especially creeped out at this point, just curious. I did start to get a little worried when she took a step towards and reached for the handle of the screen door. At this moment, my father rushed past me. "Got him," he said, while clutching his keys. "Let's go." As he moved closer to the screen door, he noticed the girl. "Oh, hi," I heard him say to the girl from my position behind him. He opened the door and then turned to shout down the stairs, "Steph, it's time to go." "All right," my sister responded in that annoyed teenage girl voice of hers as she came running up the stairs. My dad held the door open for her and I and pulled it shut behind us. My sister and the girl started walking down the driveway to my sister's car. I think my dad and I had the same thought. They did not acknowledge each other. Two teenage girls didn't bother saying hello to each other. I've been around my sister and her friends enough to know that they could barely stop speaking when they were together. We stood in front of the garage, watching the two of them walk away. When they reached the car, my sister put her key in the door and unlocked it. The girl, now standing by the passenger door, tried the handle. It was locked. The next moment plays out in slow motion in my mind. I remember my sister, still holding the door handle, slowly look up at the girl with the big eyes and says, "Can I help you?" My dad heard it too and began quickly walking down the driveway. My sister looked at him with a confused stare. He turned to the girl and repeated my sister's question, "Can I help you?" The girl took a step back from the car, her eyes darting from my dad to my sister to me. She looked back to my dad and said something I will never forget. "You have my grandmother in your basement." My dad looked at the girl and said what we were all thinking. What? Now, I may not have spent a lot of time in our basement as my room was upstairs, but I was down there every day. The biggest TV was down there, the laundry room was down there, my hockey equipment was stored in the furnace room, my sister's room was down there. So I'm pretty sure I would have noticed someone's grandma in our basement. The girl, however, seemed convinced. She began to rant about how her pastor had told her we were the devil worshippers and that we were trying to kill her and had planned to sacrifice her grandmother. I was getting pretty creeped out at this point, not just by what she was saying, but by how she moved. The way her eyes kept moving around rapidly, the way her hands were shaking. My sister and I both stood frozen to the concrete of the driveway. My dad, however, didn't panic. He had been a paramedic my entire life. He had definitely seen his share of strange things and dealt with people with mental health issues. He calmly told my sister and I to go inside. Neither of us moved. He said it again, more forcefully than before, and we began to walk backwards up the driveway. The girl began to look very confused. She looked at the three of us and began to make almost a whimpering noise. She started moving up the driveway as well, while walking almost sideways. My dad took a step closer to her, and the whimpering intensified. Just stay right here with me, my dad said calmly, and we'll figure this out. The girl moved faster up the driveway towards me, the whimpering reaching a crescendo before she lunged at me, and the whimpering became a scream. "No!" the girl cried, while reaching both hands out to me. I turned to run. My father lunged at the girl and was able to grab both her arms and pull them back behind her back. My sister and I ran into the house and slammed the door behind us as the girl violently flailed against my father's grip. Once inside, my sister and I rushed to the window on the side of the house. We could only see my dad struggling to subdue the girl as her flailing continued. He began guiding her up the driveway towards the garage. When they were both inside, he closed the garage door. I stared at my dad while the door came down. I still remember the feeling of terror as the door made contact with the cement. We couldn't see him. There were no windows on the garage door anymore. There had been, but I broke them with an errant slap shots, and now, where there were windows, there was only plywood. My sister and I stood in the kitchen crying and staring at the garage door for what seemed like an eternity. Finally, the side door opened, and my dad looked at us through the kitchen window. "It's okay," he said. "Just call 911 and tell them to send an ambulance." Behind him, we heard the girl crying. My sister called the emergency dispatcher, and we waited. Moments later, the ambulance pulled into the driveway, and my dad opened the garage door. The girl was bent over at the waist and sobbing loudly. My dad greeted his colleagues, who ran into the garage and calmly and gently guided the girl towards the back of the ambulance. We could hear her wailing as the ambulance backed down the driveway. When the ambulance had pulled away, my sister and I sprinted through the garage and embraced our father. It had been a frightening experience that could have gone much worse if it wasn't for him. Small town horror. To satisfy your curiosity, everyone involved in this story is a 13 to 14-year-old male. This happened in early 2004 in late October. Anyways, on to the story itself. My friend Derek had recently gotten a text late at night from someone claiming he was a mutual friend of ours, Ian. The next day, Derek asked Ian why he texted him so late, and Ian tells him he didn't actually text him. So Ian and Derek start asking every one of our close friends if it was them, and they all denied it was them. Later that day, during track practice, Derek gets a call from Ian, and whoever was on that phone sounded exactly like the real Ian. But it was impossible, because we saw Ian sitting in the stands, and he wasn't on his phone. Derek then put it on speakerphone for John and I to hear, and told him he knew he wasn't Ian. The person on the phone then said, "Yes, I am. I see you right now standing next to John and James, my name." This was absolutely terrifying. He knew our names, and he was looking right at us, and we had no idea who the hell he was. Derek hung up quickly after that. We each stupidly told each other that we won't get the police involved until he actually does something dangerous. The next day, during lunch, our whole group of friends got together and attempted to find out who this person was. As lunch was nearing its end, and we ran out of ideas of who it could be, we got a text. The text read, "I see you." As you read this, the six of us shot up from the table and started looking around to spot anyone looking suspicious. But we had no luck, and still no idea who this was. At the end of the day, we decided that'd be best to stick together with Derek, as he was walking home just in case anything happened. As we were walking with Derek, he got another text. This time it read, "I'm waiting." We each basically shat our pants and sprinted towards Derek's house. We slowly approached the doorway and bursted into his house. We searched the house thoroughly and came up empty once again. There were no further incidences, and we never find out who this person was. But I have a hunch it was a local pedophile who was notorious for this sort of thing. Atlantic City Rambler. This happened last year when I visited Atlantic City. In fact, I was there in October, right before Hurricane Sandy came through and tore up the boardwalk. So, I was in Atlantic City for the first time, and I was staying at the Trump Taj Mahal. I spent most of my time playing in their poker room, which was actually the source of several interesting encounters, although this one was the creepiest. I was playing in a half NL game, high roller I know, when this older man, probably mid to late 50s, sits down to my left. He had long gray hair and a ponytail, and was wearing a baseball cap and a denim jacket. Overall, he just had a shabby appearance. Anyway, he sits down, and pretty soon he starts up this monologue. I think he was drunk, but there was clearly something else wrong with him. It was as if he was just verbalizing his stream of consciousness, unfiltered. He was speaking continuously in a low, steady voice. A good deal of his speech involved him cursing and complaining about hands or throwing out insults. For example, after I beat him in a particular hand, he muttered something along the lines of, "This asshole at Queens is fucking asshole." Bear in mind, he didn't even look at me while saying this. He just incorporated it into his monologue while looking ahead at nothing in particular. Also, at one point, an Asian woman sat in as the new dealer, and I remember him making some kind of racist comment about her. The whole time, people at the table were getting pissed at the guy, not only for the obvious reasons, but he was also playing slowly and holding the game up. Eventually, the table calls for the floor and two guys come over and confront the guy, and they tell him he has to leave and that he can come back tomorrow. He just ignores them at first, and they ask him to leave a couple more times. Finally, he says alright and slowly gets up and leaves. I felt bad for the guy more than anything. It was apparent that he was not the most mentally stable person.